Sometimes the deepest shame we carry becomes the bridge to our greatest joy. The moment we believe we're most unworthy of love is exactly when it finds us. In the heart of the Colorado mountains, a desperate young woman, broken and exhausted, stumbles into the camp of a feared mountain man. She's carrying nothing but the brutal, ugly truth. I haven't bathed in months, she confesses, bracing for the disgust, the rejection she knows is coming. Instead, he throws his head back and laughs, a sound that echoes off the pines, and then he kisses her with a tenderness that changes everything. This is the story of two lonely souls who discover that real love isn't about being perfect. It's about being seen, accepted, and cherished exactly as you are. But what terrible secret drove her into these mountains in the first place? And who was the man waiting for her? The mountain wind carried the scent of pine and coming snow, a whisper that had become as familiar to Ezra Morrison as his own heartbeat. For 8 long years, these jagged peaks had been his sanctuary, his fortress, and his prison. At 45, the man folks in the valley below, called Bear, stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that could block out a doorway and hands that could snap a man's neck or whittle the most delicate wooden bird with equal ease. His cabin, a testament to military precision, sat nestled in a grove of ancient pines where he could see anyone approaching from 3 directions. Hand-carved wooden chimes hung from the porch, their gentle song his only alarm. Inside, the cabin was a contradiction. Military-issue blankets folded with parade ground precision lay next to delicate wood carvings of wild roses. A cavalry saber hung over the fireplace, glinting in the firelight, just above shelves lined with books of poetry and philosophy. Every morning for 8 years had been the same: coffee, strong and black, a methodical inspection of the perimeter, then whatever task the mountain demanded. Winter was coming early this year. He could feel it in the bite of the wind. He could see it in the frantic preparations of the animals. What he hadn't expected to find on this particular October morning was a woman. She materialized from a stand of aspen trees like a ghost, stumbling more than walking, her dark hair matted, her dress, once fine fabric, now torn and stained beyond recognition. This was Clara Whitmore, though he wouldn't learn her name for another hour. For 3 weeks, she had been running, following game trails, eating berries she prayed were not poison, sleeping wherever exhaustion finally claimed her. The small wooden cross around her neck, her mother's, was the only thing she'd grabbed in her desperate flight. It was a symbol of everything she'd lost: faith, family, hope. When Bear first saw her, his hand went to the knife at his belt. Strangers meant trouble. He'd built his entire life around avoiding trouble. But something in the slump of her shoulders, the sheer, stubborn will that seemed to be the only thing holding her upright, made him pause. Clara saw him at the same moment, and her first instinct was to run. This had to be the legendary Bear Morrison she'd heard whispered about in the small towns she'd skirted. A wild man, dangerous, a former cavalry officer driven mad by grief. Looking at him now, she believed the tales. He stood motionless, studying her with eyes the color of winter ice, his massive frame draped in buckskins. A thick beard covered his face, and his dark hair hung past his shoulders. He was a man who had not just embraced the wildness of the mountains, he had become part of it. But Clara was at the end of her rope. She couldn't run, she couldn't fight. When he stepped out of the shadows, she simply stopped and waited for the end. "Ma'am," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, cultured, "you look like you could use some help." That's when the words tumbled out, the confession that should have sent any sane man running. "I haven't bathed in months." The admission carried all the shame of her journey, the raw acknowledgement of what she'd become. Instead of disgust, Bear threw back his head and laughed. It wasn't a mocking sound. It was a laugh of genuine amusement, maybe even relief. Before she could process it, he stepped forward, cupped her filthy face in his massive hands, and kissed her. It was a kiss of such shocking tenderness, of such profound acceptance, that it felt like a pardon. "Well then," he said when he pulled away, his eyes twinkling, "I reckon that makes two of us. Come on up to the cabin. Let's get you fed and cleaned up." As they walked the path to his sanctuary, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years, the absence of fear. For the first time since her wedding night, she was with a man who didn't want to hurt her. The realization was so overwhelming that tears streamed down her dirty cheeks. Bear noticed but said nothing. He'd learned that the kindest thing you can do for a wounded creature is give it the space to heal. Whatever drove this woman into his wilderness would reveal itself in its own time. Or so he thought. The cabin felt like a palace. The warmth of the fire, the smell of coffee and bacon, the simple luxury of a roof over her head. Bear moved with practiced efficiency, laying out clean clothes, heating water for a bath, preparing a meal that made her stomach ache with hunger. The clothes were surprisingly well kept. A simple wool dress and underthings, folded neatly in a chest. They were my wife Sarah's, he said simply, his back to her. She's been gone 8 years now. Never got around to giving her things away. Maybe I was keeping them for a reason. Clara wanted to ask what happened, but his tone was a closed door. She accepted the kindness, the unspoken invitation to stay, to recover. As she sank into the first hot bath she'd had in months, scrubbing away weeks of grime and despair, Clara allowed herself to believe she might actually survive. She might have found a place to heal the wounds that went far deeper than any the mountain had inflicted. Outside, Bear sat on his porch, listening to the splashing sounds from inside, a sound he hadn't heard in 8 long years. The wooden chimes sang softly in the breeze. But as he sat there, his face wasn't one of peace. It was the face of a hunter who had just watched his prey walk willingly into a trap. The woman was a complication he hadn't foreseen, but she might also be an opportunity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tarnished locket. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what was inside. It wasn't a picture of a woman named Sarah. It was a picture of a man. A man with cold, calculating eyes and a cruel twist to his lips. The very same man Clara Whitmore was running from. 3 days passed in a haze of warmth and food and sleep. Clara felt her strength returning, the hollows in her cheeks filling out. The bruises on her throat had faded from a violent purple to a sickly yellow, a ghostly reminder of a man's hands. On the evening of the third day, as they sat by the fire, she carefully folded the torn remains of her wedding dress and placed it on the table. The ruined silk was a testament to a life destroyed. "I need to tell you why I'm here," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "Why I can never go back." Bear leaned back in his chair, his face patient in the firelight, giving her his full attention. But his attention felt different now, more focused, more intense. It wasn't just kindness, it was assessment. "I was married to Thomas Whitmore," she began. "He owns half of Denver, the mercantile, the hotels, the gambling houses. To the world, he's a pillar of the community." She paused, gathering her courage. "To me, he was a monster." The words came in a rush then, 3 years of suppressed terror pouring out. The wedding night when his true nature revealed itself, the beatings for imagined slights, being locked in her room for days, the high collars and clever makeup to hide the bruises, the systematic isolation from anyone who might help. "The worst part," she said, her voice breaking, "was that he convinced me it was my fault, that I was too willful, too proud, that I brought his anger on myself. For the longest time, I believed him." Bear's hands had clenched into fists, his knuckles white. "What made you finally run?" he asked, his voice a low growl. Clara's laugh was devoid of humor. "He told me he was going to sell me to a brothel in California. Said I was more trouble than I was worth as a wife, but I might still have some value." The casual cruelty of it still stole her breath. "That night, while he was passed out drunk, I took what I could and ran. I've been running ever since." Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Bear studied the ruined dress, then looked directly into her eyes. "He'll come looking for you," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know," she whispered. "Thomas doesn't like to lose his property." She stood abruptly. "I should go. I'm putting you in danger." "Sit down." Bear's voice was the unmistakable command of a military officer. "You're not going anywhere." "You don't understand," she pleaded. "The law is on his side." "I understand perfectly." Bear rose to his full height, a formidable shadow against the fire. I understand you're a woman who has been hurt by a man who should have protected you. And I understand that you found your way to my mountain, my home, and that makes you my responsibility. Clara stared at him, her heart pounding. Why would you risk yourself for me? He moved around the table until he stood before her. He gently took the ruined dress from her hands, then cupped her face, just as he had that first day. Because some things are worth fighting for, he said simply, and you, Clara Whitmore, are worth fighting for. The kiss that followed was deeper, more intentional, a promise of protection that felt absolute. This mountain has been my refuge for 8 years, he said, his forehead resting against hers. If Thomas Whitmore wants to take you from here, he'll have to go through me first. But as Clara lay in the small bedroom later that night, a nagging thought surfaced. The clothes he'd given her. Sarah's clothes. They had smelled faintly of lavender, not of years spent packed away in a dusty chest. And the dress, while simple, was of a style that was fashionable now, not 8 years ago. She fell asleep not with the peace of a rescued soul, but with the unsettling feeling that she had escaped one cage only to find herself in another, far more mysterious one. 50 miles away in Denver, Thomas Whitmore was not just posting rewards. He was meeting with a man in a dusty office, a man who specialized in finding things that didn't want to be found. She's with him, the tracker said, pointing to a spot on a map of the Colorado Territory. Thomas smiled. Excellent. But I don't just want her back. I want the man who took her from me to understand what it means to cross Thomas Whitmore. The trap was not just on the mountain. Another was being set in the valley below. The first snow came, blanketing the mountain in white. Over the following weeks, Bear became her teacher. He taught her the realities of mountain survival, how to split firewood, read the weather, track animals. He showed her how to use a knife, not just for whittling, but for defense. Can you shoot? He'd asked one morning. Clara nodded. My father taught me. He retrieved a rifle from a locked chest, a military-grade Sharps rifle, meticulously maintained. Good, he said. Practice every day, aim for the heart. His instruction was methodical, relentless. It felt less like he was teaching her to survive the winter and more like he was training a soldier for a coming war. He talked about his past in clipped, rehearsed sentences. Cavalry officer, served from 61 to 65, stayed on for the Indian campaigns, made it to major before he decided he'd had enough of killing. When she asked about Sarah, his story was always the same. Cholera came through in 67, took her and our baby boy inside of a week. But the grief in his eyes never seemed quite right. It was a hard, cold anger, not the soft sorrow of loss. He never spoke her name with affection, only as a fact, a historical marker for when his life in the world had ended. Clara found herself watching him, trying to reconcile the gentleman who carved flowers on a hair comb he made for her, with the ruthless instructor who corrected her shooting stance with cold precision. One evening, as she organized the books on his shelf, a small leather-bound volume of poetry slipped from her grasp. It fell open to the inside cover. There, in elegant feminine handwriting, was an inscription. To my dearest Ezra, may these words bring you peace until you return to me. All my love, Sarah. September 1874. Clara's blood ran cold. 1874. According to Bear, Sarah had been dead for 7 years by then. This book was new. The inscription was fresh. He had lied. His entire story, the foundation of the fragile trust she had built with him, was a complete fabrication. Who was Sarah? And more importantly, who was Ezra Bear Morrison? The sanctuary he had offered her suddenly felt like the most dangerous place in the world. Clara confronted him that night, the book held in her trembling hand like a weapon. You lied to me, she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. Who is Sarah? Bear looked at the book, and for the first time she saw the mask of the stoic mountain man crumble. He sank into his chair, the massive frame suddenly looking weary, defeated. He stared into the fire for a long moment before he spoke, his voice low and raspy with secrets. My name isn't Ezra Morrison, he began. That was the name of a good man who died at Sand Creek. I took it to honor him and to disappear. He finally met her gaze, and his eyes were filled with a pain so profound it stole her breath. My real name is Benjamin Cole. The name meant nothing to her, but he continued. And Sarah was my wife. She didn't die of cholera. She left me 2 years ago. She ran off with my business partner, a man named Marcus Thorne. They took everything, my money, my company, my future, and they were helped by a man who financed the whole thing, a man who held the loans over my head and called them in at the perfect moment to ruin me completely. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. A man named Thomas Whitmore. Clara felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Thomas, her Thomas. The monster from her past was also the architect of this man's ruin. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. You knew, she whispered. When I told you my story, you already knew who he was. I've been tracking him for 2 years, Clara, Benjamin Cole said, the name bear feeling like a lie on her tongue now. I learned everything about him, his business dealings, his enemies, his appetites. I knew he had a young wife he kept locked away. I knew he was a monster. I just never expected that wife to stumble into my camp. He ran a hand over his face. I came to these mountains not to hide, but to plan, to wait for the right moment to take my revenge on Thomas Whitmore. And then you arrived. You weren't part of the plan. The cabin, her sanctuary, was a liar's den. The man who had shown her such tenderness was consumed by a cold, calculated vengeance. She was not a kindred spirit he had rescued. She was a piece on his chessboard, an unexpected asset in his private war against their shared enemy. So what am I to you? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. A weapon? A pawn to use against him? He stood and came to her, his eyes pleading. No. At first, maybe. I won't lie to you again, Clara. At first I saw you as an opportunity, but then I got to know you. I saw your courage, your strength. I saw the woman Thomas tried to break but couldn't. He reached out but hesitated to touch her. Clara, my plan was about hate. It was cold and empty. You, you changed everything. You made it about justice. You made it about protecting someone, not just destroying someone else. I fell in love with you. That was the one thing I never planned for. The confession hung in the air, a fragile bridge over the chasm of his lies. Could she trust him? Could she believe that his feelings were real, not just another part of his intricate game? Before she could answer, the wooden chimes on the porch sang a frantic tune, announcing an approaching rider. It was old Pete Jameson, his face grim as he stamped the snow from his boots. Pete didn't waste time with pleasantries. He threw a piece of paper on the table. It was a wanted poster. Her face, roughly sketched, stared back at her. But it was the text that made her sick. Wanted. Clara Whitmore. Mentally unstable. Prone to delusions. Dangerous to herself. It painted Thomas as a concerned husband, desperate to bring his beloved sick wife home safely. A reward of $500 was offered. He's in Copper Creek, Pete said, his voice low. Hired a dozen men. Men who'll do anything for that kind of money. He's telling everyone you were kidnapped by a mad mountain man. Clara's carefully constructed courage began to crumble. He has legal papers, Ben, she whispered, the name feeling foreign. Marriage certificates, doctor's notes he paid for. In the eyes of the law, I'm his property. The law of the valley is one thing, Ben said, his voice hard as iron. The law on this mountain is another. He looked at Pete. Are they ready? Pete nodded. Waiting for your signal. But Ben, Whitmore isn't stupid. He's got a man on the inside. Ben's eyes narrowed. Who? One of the hired guns, Pete explained. A young fella named Billy. His older sister used to work in one of Whitmore's hotels. She fell from a window one night. Everyone knew what really happened. But Whitmore owned the sheriff. Billy's been waiting for a chance to get close to him for a year. He's on our side. The intricate web of Ben's plan was becoming clear. He hadn't just been hiding and waiting. He'd been building a network, laying a trap. Pete wasn't just a friendly trader. He was Ben's lieutenant. And now, thanks to Thomas's own cruelty, they had a spy inside the enemy camp. I have to leave, Clara said, the old panic surging. I won't let him hurt you because of me. Like hell you will. Ben's voice was quiet, but implacable. He knelt beside her. Look at me, Clara. For 2 years, my world has been nothing but darkness and hate. You brought light back into it. I'll be damned if I let that bastard in a fancy suit take you away from me. He took her hands. This is no longer about my revenge. This is about our future. He's coming for you, yes, but he's walking into a trap he can't even imagine. And you, Clara, are not the bait. You're the executioner. He stood and walked to the fireplace, retrieving the cavalry saber from above the mantel. He offered it to her, hilt first. Thomas thinks he's coming for a broken woman. Let's show him who you really are. The steel was cold and heavy in her hands, a symbol of the choice before her, to be a victim or to be a warrior. The storm broke 2 days later, a blizzard that turned the world into a swirling vortex of white. Through the snow they came, a dozen riders struggling up the trail, their dark shapes blurry against the storm. At their head was Thomas Whitmore, his arrogant posture unmistakable even from a distance. They're here, Ben said, his voice unnervingly calm as he checked his Sharps rifle. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she moved with a purpose that surprised her. She donned the heavy winter coat, her hand closing around the hilt of the saber at her waist. Remember the plan, Ben said, his eyes locking with hers. Let him believe he's in control. Let his arrogance be his undoing. He opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch, a lone, imposing figure against the raging storm. Hello, the cabin, Thomas called, his voice laced with triumph. I'm Thomas Whitmore. I'm here for my wife. Mr. Whitmore, Ben said politely. I'm Ezra Morrison. I believe you're looking for Clara. I'm looking for my wife, Thomas corrected sharply. Clara Whitmore, who is in need of medical attention. I have documents. I've seen your wanted posters, Ben interrupted calmly. Very creative. Thomas's face darkened. I don't know what lies she's told you, but Clara is not well. She suffers from delusions. I'm here to bring her home. That's funny, Ben said conversationally. She seems perfectly rational to me. Told me some interesting stories about the kind of care she received from her loving husband. Whatever she told you is the product of a diseased mind, Thomas snapped. She's my wife, legally and before God. If you continue to harbor her, you'll be charged with kidnapping. Ben smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made even the hired guns shift in their saddles. Federal prosecution, he repeated thoughtfully. That's assuming you make it back down the mountain to file charges. The threat, delivered so calmly, hung in the freezing air. Are you threatening me? Thomas sputtered. I have 11 armed men. One man, Ben agreed pleasantly, on my mountain, in a blizzard. And you just threatened the woman I love. That changes the mathematics considerably. He then called out, Clara, would you come out here, please? Taking a deep breath, Clara stepped onto the porch. Thomas's mask of concern vanished, replaced by a look of ugly, possessive rage. But he was looking at a different woman. She stood straight and tall beside Ben, her gaze unwavering. Hello, Thomas, she said calmly. I see you got my message. Thomas's eyes narrowed, taking in her healthy appearance, her confidence. Clara, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. You've been sick, darling. This man has filled your head with lies. Come home. Her laugh was bright and clear. Sick, Thomas? I've never felt better. The mountain air, good food, and the company of a man who doesn't beat me. It's done wonders for my health. His control snapped. You are my wife. You belong to me. No, Clara said simply. I'm not. In that moment, watching his face crumble as he realized his power over her was truly gone, Clara felt the last chains of her old life fall away. He gestured to his men. Bring her to me. Use whatever force is necessary. As 4 of the men dismounted and advanced, Clara stepped forward, placing herself in front of Ben. No more running, Thomas, she said, her voice ringing out. You want to talk about vows? Let's talk about them. Enlighten us, Thomas sneered. I promise to love, honor, and obey, she said clearly. And you promise to cherish and protect me. You promise to be faithful, not threaten to sell me to a brothel. She pulled down the collar of her shirt, revealing the faded bruises on her throat. Are these delusions, Thomas? She pushed up her sleeve, showing the circular scar from a fireplace poker. What about this? A murmur went through the hired guns. Young Billy looked physically ill. You lying witch! Thomas started forward, but Ben blocked his path. I wouldn't, he said softly. She's my property, Thomas raged. The law is clear. Property. Clara's voice cut through his rant like a whip. Is that what you call a wife? She turned to his men. He's paying you to help him kidnap a woman who ran from his violence. He told you I'm crazy. Do I look insane to you? Mr. Whitmore, Billy said, his voice shaking. This ain't what you told us. Shut up, Billy, another man snapped, but the doubt was spreading. Seeing his support waver, Thomas grew desperate. He drew his pistol and pointed it directly at Clara. Enough, he snarled. You're coming with me now, or I'll put a bullet in your lover and make you watch him die. Choose. In that instant, everything went silent but for the howl of the wind. The moment Thomas drew his weapon, Ben's hand blurred, his own pistol clearing leather and leveling on Thomas's chest. But Clara was no longer a victim. She felt a cold, clear rage fill her. You want to shoot someone, Thomas? She said, her voice deadly calm. Then shoot me. Pull the trigger and show all these men exactly what kind of husband you really are. His hand wavered. This was not the terrified woman he knew. I'm not being foolish, she said, taking a step toward him, toward the gun. I'm being honest. She reached into a saddlebag on a nearby horse and pulled out a set of iron shackles, holding them up for all to see. Look what your employer brought with him, gentlemen. Chains to drag his beloved wife home. The effect was dramatic. Even the hardest of the men looked disgusted. Those are for her own protection, Thomas stammered. Liar! Clara's voice was a gunshot in the cold air. You brought those chains because you know the only way you can control me now is through force. Then why the chains, Thomas? Ben asked quietly from the porch. The question hung in the air, an irrefutable accusation. Thomas, seeing his authority disintegrate, finally dropped all pretense. Fine, he screamed, his face purple with rage. You want the truth? She is my wife, bought and paid for, and I'll treat her however I see fit. If that means beating some sense into her, that is my right. The raw confession shocked even his most loyal men into silence. There it is, Clara said softly. The real Thomas Whitmore. I've heard enough, Ben said, his voice deadly quiet. No, Clara said, holding up a hand. This is my fight. She turned back to Thomas, her eyes filled not with fear, but with a pity that was more insulting than hatred. You want me back, Thomas? She asked conversationally. You want me to put on those chains? He mistook it for surrender. It's about time you came to your senses. She smiled, a chilling expression. Then you'll have to kill me, because I would rather die free on this mountain than live one more day as your victim. The words struck him like a physical blow. He raised his pistol, his hands shaking with fury. But Clara moved first. She didn't run. She lunged forward, grabbing his wrist. The gun fired, the bullet whining harmlessly into the snow. In the struggle, she twisted the weapon from his grip. That's when Ben moved, covering the distance in 2 strides. He didn't draw his weapon. He simply grabbed Thomas by his expensive coat and lifted him off the ground. You drew on my woman, Ben said, his voice a low whisper of death. In my book, that makes you a dead man. Wait, Clara called out. Ben paused, his knuckles white as he held the sputtering man in the air. I want him to live, she said, her voice steady. I want him to live with the knowledge that he lost. I want him to go back to Denver, knowing his money, his power, his laws. None of it was enough. I want him to live with the failure. Ben studied her face, then a slow smile spread across his. That's a crueler punishment than killing him. He dropped Thomas unceremoniously in the snow. Just then, more figures emerged from the swirling blizzard. A half-dozen men in long coats, rifles held at the ready. At their lead was a man with a silver star pinned to his coat, the territorial marshal. Thomas Whitmore, the marshal said, his voice booming over the wind. You're under arrest for assault, kidnapping, and the murder of Sarah Jensen. Billy stepped forward. His name isn't the only thing he lied about, Marshal. He confessed to beating his wife right here. We all heard him. The hired guns looked at each other, then began dropping their weapons in the snow. The trap had been sprung. Thomas Whitmore, the untouchable pillar of Denver society, was finally brought down, not by a single man's revenge, but by the courage of a woman who refused to be broken. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing the mountainside to life with wildflowers. Clara stood in the doorway of the cabin, her true home, watching Ben, her husband, work in the garden they had planted together. Thomas Whitmore was a distant memory, his empire in ruins, his name a synonym for disgrace in Denver. Most of his hired guns had testified against him, eager to distance themselves from his crimes. His conviction was swift and his sentence was long. Clara rarely thought of him. The woman he had terrorized was a ghost. She touched the simple gold wedding band on her finger, a ring Ben had crafted from nuggets he'd panned from the creek. Their wedding had been simple, officiated by old Pete, who, in another twist, turned out to be a retired judge. They spoke their vows in a meadow behind the cabin, with only the mountains as their witness. She wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself, with wildflowers from their garden woven into her hair, held in place by the wooden comb that had been Ben's first gift. "Do you ever regret it?" Ben asked, his hands covering hers as they gently pressed a bean seed into the rich earth. "Giving up the comforts of town for this?" Clara laughed, a sound as bright and clear as the mountain air. "Regret choosing love over luxury? Freedom over a cage? Being cherished over being owned?" She shook her head. "Never. Not for a single moment." He smiled, that soft, wondering smile that still made her heart ache with love. "I thought my life was over," he said. "I thought I'd never trust again. You stumbled into my wilderness, Clara, and reminded me that some things are worth coming back to life for." That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the peaks in shades of gold and rose. The wooden chimes sang their gentle song in the breeze. The woman who had once confessed her deepest shame to a stranger had discovered that it had become the bridge to her greatest joy. She had been seen, truly seen, and loved back to herself. "Ben," she whispered, leaning her head against his strong shoulder, "thank you for laughing when you should have been disgusted, for showing me that sometimes the most broken people can build the most beautiful lives together." His kiss was gentle and sure, full of the promise of all their years to come. In the distance, a wolf howled its ancient song to the moon. Clara Morrison closed her eyes, listening to the steady beat of her husband's heart, and knew with absolute certainty that she was finally home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the story we have for you tomorrow.